Hey everyone, welcome to session 5. This is your last technical session, so get psyched. It went by really quick, I'm sure, but hopefully this was a good taste of what Turing will start to feel like as you enter Mod 1. Let me share my screen really quick. We can wait for a few more people to trickle in here. Excellent. Yeah, so congrats everyone for finishing the assessment. That's going to be graded and we will get results back to y'all by probably next week, hopefully early next week. So y'all will get feedback from us and then you'll hear about your status for entering Mod 1. And yeah, but good job everyone for doing those. Yeah, this lesson will be fun because it's kind of like, I think it's a good intro to a few new concepts like iteration and pseudocoding for y'all. And so I would say like sit back, take notes. We're going to go into breakout rooms too. So make sure you have all your programs closed out and notifications muted, and you're ready to go. Just a few reminders too, or just one reminder, the capstone is due in a few weeks. So once we're finished with this lesson, I would say like your goal between now and then is to work through that capstone, and I would try to get started on it as early as possible. It does take a bit of time, so it's going to be a lot easier if you split it up into days like we recommend, rather than trying to do all of it in 1 week or even 1 day. Definitely don't do that. So yeah, get on your capstones. I think they're due on June 3rd for y'all. So if you're yeah, for 2005A, capstones are due on June 3rd. Cool. We're going to get into breakout rooms first and do a quick icebreaker. So person with shortest name will go first. Introduce yourself, pronouns, and I'm sure everyone has a lot of these recommendations since quarantine, but please share your book or TV show or movie that you've watched recently and really enjoyed or really haven't enjoyed. I know there's been a lot of duds for me on Netflix, so feel free to share out. And then also do an accountability review. So if you're comfortable, share with your classmates what tangible progress you have made towards your Mod 0 focus goals. And yeah, if you have extra time, I would just share like what things you're all doing to get ready to start Turing. I know it's kind of like there's probably a lot of feelings of maybe stress or anticipation. So I would encourage everyone to just like share what they're doing to get ready and support each other that way. So I think Mason's gonna, Mason, are you able to do the breakout groups?
I think I should be able to here, so.
Cool.
Okay. Did that happen?
I did not get a notification.
Let's, 1 second.
Oh wait, there we go. Got
Oh,
it.
sweet. Great.
See y'all in a bit.
Okay, now I'm...
All right. Cool. So we're going to go over this first section of class is over iteration. And iteration is a important programming concept. It's basically a tool that's in every language, but the syntax will be different depending. But it's a tool that you can use in any language that you're writing in, and it's helpful because it's basically a process of repeating a task for each object in a collection. So, like, I guess if you break that down into simpler terms, it basically means we're looping over a collection or an array. A lot of people will refer to a collection and an array as synonymous. So you can think of it that way too. So iteration is essentially looping over a bunch of objects in an array and repeating the same task on each of those objects. And it's something that is in programming, but it is also in real life. So for example, we've got a scenario here that a teacher may do, which is grading papers. So I'm actually going to just draw this out real quick. Good old Paint here, or whatever Max version is. I'm not sure. Paintbrush. Okay, cool. So like if you had, so I'm gonna model an array here. Beautiful array. And let's say I had like 3 papers in this array. This is for a college course. Oh man, beautiful. All right, so if I'm the teacher and I am grading these papers, I'm gonna do a couple tasks to each one. So like for the first paper, I'll look at it, I'll read over it, la 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 la, and then I will give it a grade. So I'm gonna give this one seems like it deserves a B. And then I'm going to move on to the next paper and repeat that same exact task for the next one. So I'll read over it. I think this one deserves an A minus. Cool. And then I'll do the exact same thing for the next one, read over it, and I think this one is going to get, I'm going to give it a C+. So basically, iteration is like you have an array of objects. Each object, let's say, is a paper. When I iterate over this array, what that means is I'm taking each object, doing something to it, and then moving on to the next object. So another example in real life, like feeding animals, let's say the collection we have is a group of animals. For each animal, we would bring the animal to the food bucket, we would allow it to eat, and then bring the animal back to the barn. And then we would repeat the same exact step with the next animal. So in programming, these are examples of tasks that are more easily done with a computer. Computers are really good at doing things like crunching numbers. So for example, this scenario, like let's say we have an app that we have to calculate the max heart rate of a bunch of our users. So, you know, we'll say kind of in the same theme as the real life examples, we'll say that the scenario or the task is to calculate max heart rate. And then the collection that we have, we're working with a bunch of users. So we'll say our collection is a bunch of birth years for each of those users. And then for each of those birth years, what we're gonna do is subtract birth year from 29, or actually this should be 2020, because it's 2020, right? Subtract each birth year from 2020 to get the user's age, and then subtract that age from 220 to get the max heart rate. And then we would repeat with the next year. One more example of that is, say, let's say we have an app where we are just like printing out a bunch of names, but in our database, they're formatted like all lowercase and there's no spaces. So let's say we want to print them out in a nice way. So our program would work on this collection of names. For each name, it would take the name, capitalize the first letter, and then the next step would be lowercasing all the remaining letters. And then I guess like a third step you could also say would be like printing out the name. And then we would loop over that for each name in our collection. So let's have y'all brainstorm like a scenario on your own that would demonstrate iteration. So if y'all want to, hopefully you have the lesson in front of you. Let's just take like a couple minutes for everyone to like fill in these blanks. Think about a scenario, and if it helps, you know, think of like, I would say think of an app maybe on your phone that you use every day, and like think of a scenario that the app uses or like needs to do. And then you can like more easily start thinking of like, okay, what's the collection going to be? What's the work I'm doing? And then fill it in like that. So let's just take like a couple minutes here, and then I'll ask if anyone wants to share out. All right, just give me a thumbs up if you're done, and no thumbs up if you need more time. All right, I'm gonna give it like 30 more seconds. Cool. Does anyone want to share out what they wrote for iteration in real life? If you want, you can just raise your hand. Sweet. I saw Angela first. And Angela, you can unmute yourself, but I'm just gonna like write what you had for each of these. So what was your scenario?
Oh, okay. So my scenario was like a Spotify playlist.
Okay.
And my collection is just songs.
Okay.
And then for each song, I play till the end, and then I go to the next song.
Until end. And then
Repeat for the next song.
there's the next song. Love it. Cool. I like it. I think the only modification I would make would be like for this scenario, I would just be a little more specific and be like, okay, like what's the work I'm doing? I'm essentially like playing a Spotify playlist, right?
Right.
Cool. Who else wants to share out? I think I saw a couple hands. Oh, cool. Eduardo?
Great. So mine was, my scenario was my daily interaction with my Animal Crossing villagers. And my collection is all of the villagers who live on my island.
Okay, wait, hold on 1 second. I had
Okay.
browser issues. Okay, so your scenario is Animal Crossing. Also, I love it. I was just thinking about buying that today. What's your scenario specifically?
Daily interactions with
Daily?
Animal Crossing villagers.
Okay, daily interactions with Animal Crossing villagers. Love it. And then what was your collection?
All the villagers who live on my island.
Okay, I'm just gonna say villagers.
And for each villager,
Sweet.
I want to locate them on the island, then talk to them, and then gift them an item.
Item.
And
Love
then repeat with the next villager.
Well, you're so nice to your villagers. You're gifting them, all of them, an item. I feel like that's really nice. Awesome, good work. Cool, and then let's do one more actually. Let's have one more. I'm gonna delete this so I can have a fresh slate. Megan, I saw Megan's hand first.
I just did a scenario of calculating a workout time, a collection of exercises.
Time. Okay, and your collection is
A
exercises?
collection of exercises, yeah.
Okay.
And then for each exercise, ask for time on exercise, and then display time on exercise. And repeat for next exercise.
Repeat for next exercise. Cool, love it. Awesome. You all did great with this. Let's do one more here. And I think this time I want people to post in the chat. So like think back to that grocery store. I think we like had you all model a grocery store class last session. So think back to that class and then like think about what is something you would keep inside of an array on that grocery store class. So maybe that class had an attribute which was a an array data type. Think about like an example of that and like what you might need to iterate over that collection. So take 30 seconds to think, and then I'm just going to ask for people to post in the chat. All right, cool. If y'all want to like post like your scenario collection for each do this then in the chat, let's have you all do that, and then I'll call out a few. I've already seen some good ones. So Nico said apply a members discount. So that's his scenario. So I'm gonna actually put that in here. His collection looks like are items in a shopping cart. For each item, looks like he is going to do a couple things. Select one item, apply the discount, and then move on to the next item. Cool. I saw all right, I like this one from Nell. So Nell says scenario is take an inventory of produce. So that's the scenario. The collection is a bunch of produce items. For each produce item, we're going to do some work, and that would be count the number of items and then move on to the next item. Cool. I don't know, Mason, do you see any ones that you like? I'm just like reading through some of them. Any that you want to call out? Ooh, I like this one from Tim. His scenario was stocking shelves, and his collection was merchandise. So then for each item, he's going to do some work, which would be take it from the cart, put it on the shelf, apply a price tag, and then move on to the next shelf. I like that one. I like Christopher just posted one about checking for broken eggs. His collection is a bunch of eggs. For each egg, he's going to inspect, make sure they're not broken, and then repeat. Love it. Very real life scenario right there. Cool. Thank you all for participating in this. So next thing we're gonna do is put y'all into front end and back end specific breakout groups. And so hopefully if y'all don't have a like program by your Zoom name, could you just edit that right now and put like front end or back end so Mason can easily sort the groups. So like Megan, could you just edit your name? We'll put it in the chat.
So I believe I've gotten all of the front end students into a breakout room. So when we're ready, people in the front end program should see something to join a breakout room, whereas the back end students will probably just be in this main room. So bear with us if there's technical difficulties, but I think I'm ready to give it a try when y'all are.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, so back end people, just stay here with me in like the main session. Basically what we're gonna do is like, actually show y'all iteration in code. And y'all can even look at these REPLs here. Sometimes these like don't work on certain browsers. So if these don't work for you in the lesson, just go here and you can like open it in REPL. But we're gonna, we're just gonna go over each of these with y'all. So
All
cool.
right, and I opened up the front end room, so I'm gonna pop over there.
Bye, front end.
Bye.
All right, is anyone here front end that didn't get a notification? No? Okay. Sweet. So I'm going to try to open one of these REPLs here. These have been kind of acting poorly for me tonight, so let's see if this works. One quick note about a REPL is that so like this is basically an interactive Ruby environment, and it's really nice because you can basically like have what looks like your terminal over here in a web browser. So like instead of having to run code in your terminal, you can just run it in the browser, and then you can also like send code snippets to people depending on like if you've saved this REPL or not. So this is just like a cool tool to know about. The one thing though with this is like, I don't think I can edit this. So if I try to edit, it'll just like make me a new REPL, one that's like editable. So just so you know, hopefully this loads. I was having some issues with it earlier. Come on, you can do it. Yay. All right. So this is, so this code snippet here is an example of like how we would iterate over a collection. So like what this code is doing, we can just like walk through it line by line, and then we'll run this code and see what happens. But basically like line 1, what I'm doing is I'm assigning a variable students to this array of strings. And then on this next line here, I'm using this variable. I'm calling the Ruby method .each on it. Oops. So like .each is it's like a built-in Ruby method basically, and it's how you iterate over arrays. So like .each is .each is a method that can only be used on arrays. So like it couldn't be used on other data types like strings or numbers. So just keep that in mind. Each can only be used on arrays. And each is also like just one method that is used to iterate. There's actually a bunch of Ruby methods that are used to iterate, but each is like the most basic one. Cool, so next we get to this kind of weird syntax, do. You've probably never seen this before, but basically like what we're encountering right now is a do block. So like, I would write this down, but like whenever you have a do block, like there's always an end. So whenever you use do, you're always gonna have to close it with end. That's just like how Ruby syntax works. If you don't have this end, like if I didn't have this, this code would probably error out. So like if I try to run this code, yeah, I get a syntax error. Unexpected end of input, expecting keyword end. So make sure you always have do and end go together. This next part here, this student within these two pipe characters, that's what we call them, pipe characters. This is called a block variable. And I'm going to explain a little bit more what this means, but like I would write this down too. Like this is called a block variable because it is within these two pipes. And then this whole line, so line 4, is called the block. And the block that we define as whatever is between the do and the end. So like one more time, this right here is the block variable. And then this right here is the block. So like you can think of this block is, that's what's doing the work. So like back to the lesson plan, like that's what this do this part is. That's the block, right? This is the part that's actually doing the work of the iteration. So it looks like the work that we're doing is we are putting to the screen this string, and we're doing grading paper for student. And this student variable is actually referring to the block variable here, right? So these are the same variable. And then we're closing out the block. So yeah, what do y'all think is gonna happen when I run this code? Maybe just think about it in your heads, or you can post in the chat, whatever you're feeling. I just saw the comment, but yeah, Hash was saying this loop is way easier than JavaScript loop. So y'all are, this is why I love Ruby, because like, if you guys look at the front end example of these REPLs, the iteration loop looks a lot crazier than it does right now. So I think like in some ways Ruby is like an easier language to learn because you don't have to like memorize so much syntax. So like, yeah, that's my plug for Ruby. I like it a lot. Cool, so I'm just seeing like some people saying we're gonna puts grading for each student. Angela says it's gonna print it's gonna print the block line for each student. Brett said it's gonna grade each student. Yeah, so let's just run it and see what happens. Cool, so basically it looks like I'm getting a string on a new line for each student, grading paper for Megan, grading paper for Jose. And then the very last output, I'm actually getting the original array returned to me, right? So this right here is the same as this. I would make another note. So this is kind of a thing with each, but like the method each will always return the original array. Yeah, and I would definitely write that down. I'll say it again. The method each will always return the original array. That's important because like I said, there's a lot of other iteration methods in Ruby that y'all will learn about in Mod 1. But like each is unique because it's always gonna return the original array. And that may trip you up sometimes. So yeah, make a note now, start, circle it. Are there any questions up until this point? Anything coming up like about iteration or each, or like what this code is actually doing? Yeah, Hash, what's up?
So the block variable student, is that a new variable? I mean, it's not like we have students, the array, but we never defined a variable student. So I guess I'm a little confused as to how that became. Can you call on student now after that code? Has that been established, or is it only in that loop?
Yes, great question. I love that you said like we never created this we never assigned this variable, or we never created it. Like you're exactly right. We never created this variable in the sense that like on line 1 we created a variable students and assigned it to something, right? For block variables, we kind of like create them on the fly. So like, you know, this could actually be whatever you want it to be, right? This could be X. But then that means that this also has to be X, right? Because we're trying to refer to the same block variable.
Does that
and then,
exist
like,
outside of it then?
Yeah, so if we try to actually call the block variable outside of the loop, and I'm gonna run this code so y'all can see what happens. Does anyone have any guesses, like what's gonna happen when I run this code? All right, let's just run it. All right, so it looks like it actually like did the work. It did the same work as before. It printed each line, but then it got to line, whatever that is, line 7, and it said undefined local variable or method X for main object. So basically, block variables only exist within the block. That's what their scope is. You cannot call them outside of the block that they are basically defined in, right? So like, we still define this variable here by just like, you know, writing it, but we can only use it within the do and the end. So we cannot use it outside of it. I think Angela, I saw a hand.
How come it didn't end the each method? Like it didn't output the array if it's outside of it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's a really great question. I'm not exactly sure what is going on there. My guess is that it basically like, so like with code, or with Ruby, I should say, you know, like Ruby is kind of read top down. So like with some languages, if we have an error like this and we run this code, it's not going to print out anything at all. It's going to be like, you have this undefined variable here, like you got a problem. But with Ruby, it actually like printed out everything within this block so far. But then when it got to the end, my guess is that it like saw this variable and was like, oh, this isn't defined. And then it threw the error. And that's why it didn't return something. But like, I'm not 100% sure on that. Just being completely honest. That's my guess. Good question though. I would
I
actually
think it doesn't know how to properly end if you're calling within the block variable. Like if you recall it, it doesn't know how to properly end.
So if, what do you mean recall?
Like because we're recalling X outside the end, that it no longer knows how to properly end and restate the array.
Yeah, maybe, I mean that, yeah, that could be it too. Like it gets to this line, or I guess it aired out. It looks like it aired out on line 7. So yeah, I'm again, like I'm not completely sure, but I think that's a good guess too. Like it probably just like got to the end. It doesn't know how to call it outside of the block, so it threw an error. Any other questions coming up? Cool. Let's do, I'm gonna do this next one here really quick because I think it's, I want to point out something in this block. So like right here, we're kind of doing the same thing. We've got a variable or an array, we're assigning it to a variable. On line 3, we're actually assigning another variable to 0. And then we're doing an each block, and we're working on this numbers array. Looks like we're doing some work here. Looks like so like if you haven't seen this syntax before, this plus equals, this is basically like what we would call syntactic sugar. It's like basically a fancy way of saying shortcut. So like what this translates to is actually this. So like those two things are equivalent. It's basically just like a shorter way to write that. And then at the end here, we are putzing total of array. So let's run this code. Before we run it though, what do y'all think is gonna happen? And actually, sorry, one modification. I want to delete that last line, and I'm just gonna run this. So like, what do we think is gonna happen when I run just this code? All right, so I'm seeing a lot of different answers. Multiply each number by 2, potentially. Multiply each number by 2 and then prints the original array. Some people are saying there's going to be no output. So let's run this and see what happens. All right, so the only thing I see is the original array, right? This right here, 2, 6, 10, 15, 18, 23, exact same array that I've defined up here. So again, going back to that dot each funny thing, dot each always returns the original array. And maybe some of y'all are surprised because it didn't actually like print anything else to the screen. And I would say like, if we go to our other, oh no, it's not loading. But basically like we did not, like within this do block, within the work right here, all we're doing is like assigning this variable to a new value without like telling it to print anything to the screen. So like if we put a puts here, then like that would be different, right? If we run this code now, we're getting a totally different result. We're getting like the result of what this now equals. But without that puts, we didn't tell it to actually print anything to the screen. We're just doing some work here that we like can't see, but we know what's happening within this code. And again, whatever we do in the block, each always returns the original array. So I'm gonna, just because I think we're running on time, I'm gonna call everyone back to, hold on, let me see if I can call people back from here. This is interesting. I think because, oh wait, hold on. There we go. All right, I'm just pulling everyone back. Do y'all have any questions coming up still? I think I see some in the chat. If y'all have a question, it might be easier for you to just raise your hand and like unmute yourself. Yeah, and I would say too, like, you know, check out these REPLs and like try to modify it in different ways to like see what it does, right? Like if there's still questions coming up about this, I would just say like, go to the REPL, like try to edit it in different ways and like see what happens. Yeah, it's usually the best way to figure stuff out is to just try it. Cool, I think we got the front end back, right? Mason, awesome. All right,
Hey, yeah.
Cool, so we're gonna break here. Let's have y'all come back at 7:14. And then like, if y'all have any outstanding questions from this exercise, feel free to just stay after class and Mason and I can stay on after and answer them for you. So see y'all in 5 minutes, about 7:14. Hey y'all, oh my gosh, so those REPLs in the lesson plan are really finicky. I would say if you can't access them, just like, I mean, try refreshing your browser. But like you can also just, oh, it looks like Megan said she would send people the code. Yeah, so if someone can access them, like just post the code in your class Slack chat, and then everyone can just like make a file and add them with the code, and then you can still run it using your terminal or whatever. Cool. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Megan, for doing that. So this next part here, Mason is going to talk to y'all about another really important tool in computer programming, which is pseudocoding. And I'll just say that like Mason worked really hard on this lesson. It's actually like a new lesson that we're trying out with y'all because like the material that we had before was like getting a little stale. So like definitely like help us like pilot this lesson and like feel free to like give us feedback in the surveys because we definitely appreciate feedback. But like, yeah, I'll just turn it over to Mason.
Thanks, Ellen. Yeah, so as she was saying, this is a new lesson here, so I'll ask y'all for some feedback when we're through it. One of my inspirations for writing this lesson, aside from just wanting to present pseudocode, was remembering when I was applying to coding schools and seeing the phrase, like, what does it mean to think like a developer thrown out there a lot. And in my opinion, kind of breaking apart big problems into smaller pieces is a big part of thinking like a developer. And pseudocoding can really help you do that. I think two of the main areas that kind of making your large problems into much smaller problems can help is in your planning and also just with your execution of coding. So when you've received a big problem to try and solve in a code base, considering the planning element is super important. I wrote down a little scenario here, like consider a not as technically minded boss asking your development team to make a very large feature. It's really good for your team to spend time laying out all the specific steps towards achieving your larger goal, because then you can communicate how much time you expect it to take, as well as utilize your team members in ways that benefit everybody. If you don't like divide out your tasks in a way that makes sense for your stepwise progression, you'll end up doing work again and again, or maybe somebody feels like they have way too unfair of a workload and that sort of thing. So when we talk about breaking apart big coding challenges, we often say we start with pseudocoding them. So what do we mean when we say pseudocode? To me, it's kind of writing in layman's terms or plain English, kind of code line by code line, what you imagine that specific line is going to accomplish. Writing it out in kind of layman's terms rather than like jumping straight into the code can really help you keep your thoughts in order, especially if like, you know, if you have like 10 steps, maybe you know how to do 5 of them, but maybe there's 5 that you aren't quite as sure on. So it really helps you keep your like research about these things in order as well. As far as communicating what your code is doing, pseudocode is extremely helpful because it's code language agnostic. That means if you're on if you are working on a project that has like a front end team as well as a back end team, and maybe they work in different languages, explaining things with pseudocode is a really great way to communicate with people who may not know the same languages or may not even know coding languages. So we're going to practice with some pseudocode today, as well as practice thinking about breaking apart some of these bigger ideas as well. So let's go over our first scenario here. This is actually the scenario we'll use for this whole exercise. Imagine, if you will.
Hey,
Okay.
Mason, did you share your screen?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Sweet, thanks. I think I might have to stop sharing. Oh wait, stop sharing mine. I don't know if that.
Just forgot about that part.
Cool, we're good.
Did that
Thank
come up? Awesome. So, Ellen, first off, I should ask you anything to add to my preface there? Anything you're thinking of?
No, I thought that was a great explanation. I mean, the only thing I would add would just be to like double down on how important pseudocode is, especially like as you're beginning to start to code. Like it's so hard to like, so like, I mean, when you're coding, you know, like Mason kind of alluded to, like you're doing really hard problems, but you're also trying to like learn this new language and like figure out the problem in the code that you don't exactly like know all the syntax yet, right? So pseudocode comes into play because it like helps you solve those problems first in an English or in a language that you understand, which is English, right? So yeah, I would just say like, don't be, you know, don't forget that like, this is like a really good way to solve problems with other people and on your own too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the awesome things about practicing pseudocoding and breaking big problems into smaller problems is you kind of start to see ways you can do this like in your own life. Like when it comes to the work you need to accomplish, or like particularly prioritizing work. I think that's a great way to think about that. During Turing, there may be a time or two when you feel a bit flooded with work and have kind of multiple assignments pulling you multiple directions. So that prioritization can be key. All right, so jumping into our exercise here. Imagine that you're a developer for a retail outlet. The store that you work for has a customer reward system. So they track various data about the people that make purchases at the store. One day, your boss approaches you and says that your store is going to start a promotion where 3 customers are randomly selected to win a prize every month. The winners will be announced on your website, and you, the developer, are going to get a collection of the 3 customer IDs. So basically, you've been told to, you also have been told to build a form that the winners can go to verify their customer ID and email address. You know, kind of acknowledging that they won to get their like digital coupon. So what we're going to do is try to think of specific steps that need to be taken to display the 3 winners' names on this website. As you think about the steps you might take, also think about questions that this prompt makes you think of, and how might you incorporate some of those questions into your steps. So for right now, let's think about this a little bit together. When you've thought about it a little bit, maybe post in the chat a couple questions you might think of that maybe you'd ask your boss, or, you know, questions to me to try and clarify the prompt are fine as well. Yeah, I'll give you a little time here to think about that. Ah. Just refound my chat screen and some people have posted already. All right. All right, so Eric has the question, will we be given all the customer data or just the winning 3? That's a great question. And in this task, you're just being given like an array of 3 customer IDs. So that is definitely important to consider in the steps for this task. How do we determine the winners? That's a great question. In this case, when you ask your boss, they tell you that logic is worked out and you'll just be getting the customer IDs delivered to you. Will customers think that revealing their IDs is giving up some of their privacy? Probably, but we aren't going to try and we aren't trying to reveal their IDs here. We're just trying to print their names. There's some legal dubiousness there. We'll say that these customers all like checked a box when they were signing for the rewards program and they didn't know it at the time, but they agreed to give their names away. Collect the customer IDs and email addresses. So yeah, Priya, we'll say that they all signed up for this rewards program. Okay, so I'm scanning through a couple questions that we've sort of already touched on. Okay, Brett says match customer IDs with their name. So yeah, that is definitely a step we will be doing here. I would ask, have you learned about anything you might do with that collection? Anything we've been learning about here that might help you associate an ID with a name? Okay, scanning the questions here. Y'all are coming up with great questions. Content of the emails important. I think like that whole added on second part about a form to send an email, like there would be a lot of clarification you needed to do there as a developer. Like, okay, is this a whole web page I need to make, or is there a place already set out for this? Does the client have to have been active recently? So that's a great question, particularly about the selection of customers. We'll say that the 3 are like people who have made purchases this month. Okay. All right, so checkbox to opt out. Yeah, you all are thinking of a lot of good stuff here. Something I think about is that whole idea of like where this is go. So I went through the front end program, so front end things may come to mind for me more than back end things. But if they tell me they want 3 names on their website, one of the first things I think is where. Like, is this going to be on the home page? Am I going to have to make a new site? So kind of what's involved in like the presentation of the names. So awesome questions here. The next thing I would like you to maybe post in the chat is what are some of the, like, given some of the answers to the questions we just discussed, and we'll say that there is a place to display these names set out for you. What are some of the first concrete steps that you might take given this collection of ID numbers, technical steps? Okay. So we've randomized and gotten our 3 IDs. Yep, that's great.
Hey Mason, I actually missed it too, but could you repeat that?
Sure. Unsure exactly where to start. I'm kind of looking for the first several concrete technical steps. So I'm looking at Megan's answer here. She says you've received the winning ID numbers, you retrieve name by ID number and display the names. So my question there is, can you think of like a Cody term that will help you retrieve the name by ID number? Yeah. Demesio's on an iteration. We can iterate through those IDs in the array and kind of make a ping to our database for each of those IDs and get back some of their information. Awesome. So the next part of this task, we're going to go into some breakout rooms, and I'll have you read the task 2 as well as the extension. So basically this next part deals with, okay, we've iterated through our ID numbers and we have back the 3 names of our customers that are winners, but the data isn't exactly as it appears. So try to write some pseudocode for how you might approach normalizing this name data. Use some of our coding language when possible, like iteration and maybe some method names if you can recall any that might help you out. But yeah, let me get this breakout room going. And while I'm doing that.
Oh, I've got the breakout rooms all lined up.
Awesome. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, these are actually totally new breakout rooms. So like, just make sure you introduce yourself at the start, and then y'all should jump into task 2. But yep, I just sent the notification, so we'll see you in, what do you say, Mason? 10 minutes, 15?
Yeah, right in there. 12.
Woohoo!
All right.
Nice. How do you feel?
Okay. Excellent. All right. Welcome back, everyone. I'm figuring out my panel view to see everyone. How did that go? Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs middling. I see some. That's completely fine. Awesome. I would love for someone to hop in and maybe talk a little bit about what your group talked about and some of those steps. So I'll, if you don't mind, maybe like raising a hand or something, and I'll ask somebody to turn on their mic. Anyone feeling adventurous? Brave?
I think I saw Luke raise his hand.
Oh, okay. Yep, I just realized. Let's go with Luke. Thank you.
So first thing that we discussed in our group was that, I mean, we discussed before we looked up anything, and then we did look up code to do it. But the first thing that you would need to do, or one of the first things, is get rid of that underscore. Capitalize the first letters in the first name and last name, and then switch them. And then we moved on and found some code. It took pretty much each of us one Google prompt and one click to find something that would do that would get rid of the underscore and capitalize the first letters. And then it took me just one Google to find some code to switch them.
Nice. Were you, Luke, you were looking at Ruby, correct?
Yes.
So what kind of, just want to say that before proceeding, but what kind of methods or what did you find that helped you?
So Googled and went to Stack Overflow. The name of the article is Ruby remove underscores and capitalize.
Okay.
Boom! It's in the chat now. I will say that Jose and Kevin knew a lot more about how to explain how to do this, but this looks like it was a pretty good. Well, within that, it looked like it was a pretty good explanation of how to do that first half, and then I put into the chat the way to switch the arrays, or the words in the, so the switch first name and last name.
Awesome. Yeah, Ruby has some of those pretty cool baked in things that are not quite as easy in JavaScript. But did anybody in the front end program find some methods that they thought might apply in this scenario? Okay. All right, that's okay. So yeah, Tyler, I like what you were talking about there. What do you think, like, considering that we have an array here, like what, and people can type this in the chat, what is like the first thing that comes to mind that you'll need to be doing?
Are you talking about like the first step that people had in their pseudocode, Mason?
Yes, I would say this would be the first step of your pseudocode. Jose types iterate through the array. Yep, that's it. So yeah, just wanted to bring special attention to that because the first thing you do is kind of iterate through each one, because that would be kind of the opening of whatever loop or iteration you're going to use to go through every element in this array. And then within that, you can say what exactly you want to happen to each element in the array. So first we iterate through the array, and then Luke had a pretty good rundown of what you might do from there with some pretty neat Ruby code he found. That's awesome. And I think I asked exactly this, but just one other chance here. Like, I'm thinking of a method that was in like your first assignment that you might use to help you out with some of this, particularly if you're in the front end JavaScript program and you don't have a super cool bit of Ruby code you can use to do just that. String split. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of too. There are going to be a lot of ways you could go about this, but if you you could split those strings by the underscore, and that would give you another array, but like at least you would have that division and the underscore would be gone. So that could be something you use in your strategy, but there could be other ways to go about it as well. Ellen, anything you're thinking before we check out the extension and see if we got some answers there?
Yeah, I just want to ask if anyone else wanted to share out their steps. Like, I think I saw maybe a couple of hands, but I didn't catch them. So, and I will say too, you know, if your group didn't even like look up methods or like talk about specific coding implementation, that's totally okay. Like,
Completely fine.
pseudocode can be, you know, Mason and I were just talking, like pseudocode is like a really big range. You could write everything in English and just talk about the steps that you're going to do to solve the problem, or it could be more like code-esque, where you're actually like writing out, okay, I'm going to use this method, then I'm going to use this method to do this. So it could be like a really wide range of things. So like if your group didn't talk about specific code at all, that's totally fine, and we'd love to hear that too. So yeah,
Absolutely.
I don't know if anyone else wants to raise their hand, represented from a group. Oh, sweet, Demasio.
Hey, yeah. So for our group, we did exactly what you were just saying in regards to not like looking up any of the methods, but we did just kind of like walk through how, almost like a real life way of going about it. And we referred back to earlier in the lesson with when we were doing like scenario collection for each, do this and then we kind of just placed everything in like regards to those steps. And then, you know, kind of did what we did with after that.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a great step. And I remember something that is tricky is like kind of keeping straight what you're doing to each item within your iteration. So I think using a strategy like that, like what's above in the lesson, can really help you focus on that. So that's awesome. All right. Anyone else want to share what they did or how they came up with their strategy? All right, last chance. You could just hop on in because I'm apparently not great at seeing hand raises. All right, well, I would love to hear from somebody that went through the extension, some of what they were thinking about, or maybe some of the things they looked up or found when thinking about the hash format that you saw there. First off, thumbs up if you tried the extension. Let's start there. All right, I'm not seeing many thumbs. Let's see here.
Yeah, and I would say like if you didn't get to the extension, like try to do it on your own. And I also saw in the chat that like some people were or Nico was asking like, is it bad if pseudocode becomes a coding session? Again, I would say like pseudocode is a tool for you. Like it's a tool for you, but it's also a tool for like your team. So if you're pairing with someone on a project and you encounter a problem and you're like frozen, you're like, how do we even start to approach this? Like pseudocoding is a really good first step that you can, or like first step that you can like pull from your toolbox. Just start talking about like what logically you would need to do in English without even talking about code. If it becomes a code discussion, that's cool too. But like it's really a tool for you to help you like Mason said, work through really big problems and like break them down into small pieces.
Yeah, I'm just gonna reiterate, I think here, but you just have to consider your audience a little bit. Many times your audience is just going to be yourself. So really whatever is most helpful to organize your thoughts.
I think Hash maybe had a hand raised. I saw.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Hey. So I guess what I struggled with on the hash object is, so I understand a hash or an object can store different types of variables, right? You can have a string and you can have an integer or whatever, several different things in it. I don't know how, when you iterate through a hash, how it iterates through it. Is it iterating in terms of, like, for example, what you have here, you have first name, last name. Is that considered one piece that it's iterating through, or is it going to iterate through first name, last name of the first set, and then first name, second name of the last set? So I didn't really know how it iterate through, so I couldn't really plan on, how to pseudocode that, at least for me.
No, that's a great point. So I would say something great to do is to focus on like the data type of the variable. So variable customer names is an array, and it's an array full of objects. So like if you're using an iteration method, it's going to go through each element within that array. And so like an object is one element in that array. So I think along the lines of your question, like if you're iterating through customer names, you're going to hit 3 objects. And from there, you kind of need to pull the information you need from that object as you're iterating over it. So yeah, this is advanced and not something that I think really has been in your lesson plans yet or anything like that. But for me personally, I remember seeing arrays of objects as I started Turing and just kind of getting wide-eyed. So I just think even exposure to this idea is a really good starting point, and thinking about how you might iterate over an object and pull what you need from that object in that iteration.
I guess I would say then stick back to, one thing what happens to me is, like, I tend to overcomplicate things. So, what I like about the model we had earlier is that you can, with the boxes, you can kind of really keep things simple with it. So, coding can be simple if you're not overthinking it like I tend to do. So I guess with this type of situation with a hash object, with each iteration, I would take, I'd make a new variable called like a, total name or something, and then add first name and last name to create a new string, and then output it through each iteration is what I would do. I don't know if that's something that would work.
I think you're on like the exact right track. So like if we're iterating over our objects, and we're on our first object, yeah, you could kind of construct a string per object, I think is what you would kind of want to do in that iteration. So you'd be able to pull out first name, you'd be able to pull out last name. You could make some adjustments to each and then put them together and print that string. Right on. Let's see. Any other thoughts or questions about the array of objects? Or I know we were kind of jumping into discussion that's some new material, so be happy to try and field anything about that. Or we can save it to the end when we do some questions and answers as well. Ellen, any final thoughts there?
Yeah, I would say if y'all have lingering questions, concerns, I want to give everyone a bit of their evening back because we're pretty much wrapping up. So yeah, Mason, if you have any last points that you want to make before we close out, go for it.
I don't think so. I really like the strategic planning part of coding. So I just encourage you to always have that in mind as you approach your group projects and everything like that. Final thought is congrats on getting through those assessments.
Yay! Yeah, everyone, and congrats on getting through all the Mod Zero technical sessions. We really enjoyed having y'all. I mean, y'all were like an awesome group to teach. You guys participated a lot, asked a lot of good questions. You know, we're really transparent with questions and things in your class chat. So like, keep all of those things up as you, but you know, these next couple of weeks before you start touring, and then also as you start Mod 1. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like last final closing thoughts here.
Oh, I wanted to mention, I don't particularly want to put anybody on the spot right now, but I'd personally be very interested in any feedback about that exercise. If you think about things that might make it more meaningful or better, you can Slack me those thoughts and I would like truly appreciate it. In general, did thumbs up, thumbs down, did you find that helpful? Or was it kind of seem a little off base? Cool.
Yeah, and I'd say too, if you want to give feedback, you can also you can DM Mason, but like in your final survey, there's a little question about this exercise too. Okay. So like, yeah, we appreciate all feedback on the entire course. Make sure that make sure you get your capstone in by the deadline. And one final thought I have, I mean, this quote at the bottom, I think is like really important because it came from a back-end instructor at Turing who said that, I've noticed that the students that do the bare minimum on their Mod 0 capstone are the ones who usually struggle for at least the first half of the mod. So like, point there, don't just do the bare minimum if you want to succeed. I would say like, you know, we've like told you guys every day that, or every session, that coding is like muscle memory. And so if you can code every single day from now until Mod 1, you're going to be set up like so well. And like, make sure that you try to go like above and beyond on your capstone too, because like there's a lot of extensions in there, I think. And, you know, don't be afraid to experiment with stuff too. So yeah, with that being said, feel free to sign off. Thank you all for participating. And then if you want to stay on, Mason and I will answer any questions you'll have or whatever you want to talk about.
Bye to those who are leaving. All right.
Why can't I see? Oh, there we go. Angela, what's coming up?
Hey, so my question is about the backend capstone. I noticed when I was installing or like setting up for it, the Ruby version that we were asked to install is not the latest, and I was wondering why.
Oh man, did it? I'm not too familiar with the capstone details. Did the Ruby version work? Or Mason, I don't know if
Yeah, like it's all working fine. It's just more curiosity than anything. Like why,
Yeah.
like maybe that's a thing that you kind of don't use the latest version until it's like tested out or something. I don't know.
Is the website just not updated? Since
That could be
No.
it too.
No, they,
Okay.
you know, I have some ventured guesses at answers to this question. But one thing I do know is that the Ruby backend instructors actually recently did normalize around that version of Ruby. I'm not sure why they picked it exactly, but that is like what they want y'all to be using in the backend program. My guess is that maybe like there's a fear that you might use some features of Ruby that haven't made it to the newest version, or like maybe some fear of compatibility issues when students are working with each other that would just kind of be a pain to sort out. So I don't know exactly why, but those are my guesses. And I do know that that is like what they actually want you to have.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say that's a really good guess, Mason. I think also, I think like working with different versions of Ruby is really good practice. Like I can give you some field examples, but like at my startup, we do not use the latest version of Ruby because like Ruby will upgrade faster than we can keep up. And sometimes like when you upgrade versions in a huge code base, it like messes a lot of things up. So like some applications just like don't upgrade Ruby, even if more releases come out. Like, yeah. So just for you to know too, like, when you get out in the wild, who knows, you might be on Ruby like 1.5 and you'll be like, oh, there's no dot map, or like there's no like methods that I'm used to. So yeah, that's all I'll add.
All right.
Um,
Thanks.
I think I saw Dennis's hand raised.
Yeah, I basically just had a question about pseudocode. So when we're in the wild, as you say, do you have meetings with like say shareholders on projects that you're working on? Like let's say you're at a firm where you're not like an in-house developer, but you develop for other companies. Do you kind of go over scenarios with them in pseudocode? Maybe if they're not adept in coding.
Yeah, I would say that's a really good point. Like I have never had the experience of like working with an outside client and like going through pseudocode with them. Or even like maybe you're talking about like a contractor might, right?
Yeah.
I would say like, I mean, personally, I think that's totally like a use case for pseudocode maybe. But I would say an even more common use case is like pseudocoding with others at my job, like product managers who are like a little technical, but they're not developers. So like going over the logic with them is like something I do a lot in my job. I don't know, Mason, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think that's what Ellen is describing is more of the scenario I think that comes up. Though a story of a friend of mine I went to Turing with comes to mind. She got hired by a quite large telecommunications company as a junior developer, and they really didn't have too many developers on their team at all. So she kind of like found herself in a kind of the de facto tech person role of this kind of large company, and wasn't even quite sure that she knew what she was getting herself into. Anyway, she has to have a lot of these kinds of conversations where she's explaining what she's doing to her clients. And maybe it's not quite pseudocode, but it is like breaking apart like a bigger application and trying to explain the different pieces of that. So you'll find it's of different use for different audiences, like we were talking about. But
So kind of like if a UX UI designer is maybe having a meeting with project managers, and they do kind of a doodle of like, how do you make toast? You go to the fridge, get out the toast, use the toaster, just kind of like simpler, more layman steps.
Yeah, I would say like, well, you brought up UX design. I would say designers out in the wild really range too in like their level of technical expertise. Like the designers at my startup actually do some of the CSS code on our app, but I would say like other designers don't do code at all. But yeah, I would say, yeah, it just depends who your audience is. Like definitely, like when you talk about pseudocode within your job, I would say it's like going through the sometimes like the product logic or like the feature logic. So like if you're working on a feature with a UX designer, maybe it's talking to them like, okay, step 1, user goes to page. Step 2, user clicks this button, and then on the back end, this stuff will happen. Step 3, user goes to this other page, and then this other stuff happens behind the scenes. So it's, I would say it's like very like feature oriented sometimes.
All right, thank you.
No problem. Brett, what's coming up?
Yeah, so I was just wondering, back to the iterations with the real life iterations. With the students, I noticed how you use the pipe characters on the third line for the block variable.
Mhm.
And in the actual block, you use braces around students. And then I looked it up, and it said you don't have to use do and end if you use braces. That kind of threw me off.
Yeah. Nice. Good question. Like that you actually discovered a way to do the same thing. So like those braces
Yep.
are essentially syntactic sugar for do and end.
So we
yeah.
don't really necessarily need do and end in that code line.
Exactly. You don't, but I will say that like
Just visually pleasing.
visually, like it's a lot easier to like recognize a do end block when you actually have it written out, as
Okay.
opposed to like using those hashes.
So
and
could I
like,
just use parentheses if I don't? So if I do an end, could I just use parentheses student?
are you talking about like the hash syntax or the do end syntax?
The hash syntax.
So for the hash syntax, you still need the hash, but then you still need like a block variable within the pipes.
Okay.
You still need those pipes, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Cool. All right, that was it.
Yeah, good find though.
Thanks. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good one.
good one, everyone. All right.
Yes.
There we